Some wounds never heal. They just learn to hide. For 10 years, Marion Pike's wounds had built a fortress of solitude deep in the Teton Mountains. She was convinced that a gentle touch, a kind word, was something that happened in other lives to other women. Then a man named Jed Boone showed up at her gate, his wagon wheel shattered, his eyes holding a weariness that looked a lot like her own. She offered him supper out of simple courtesy, a place to shelter from the coming storm. Neither of them knew that the storm was the least of their problems, because as Jed started to mend that broken wheel, something else began to mend between them. Something deeper, something dangerous. Two people who had given up on love were suddenly daring to hope again. But what happens when you finally lower your guard after a decade of standing watch? What happens when the past you've been running from finally catches up? You're about to find out. The morning mist clung to the peaks like a ghost, and Marion Pike watched it from her kitchen window. She'd done the same thing every dawn for 10 years. 10 years of silence. 10 years of safety. Her coffee steamed in a chipped mug, one of the few things she'd carried with her from the old life. Everything else was buried. The woman she used to be was buried right along with it. Above the stone fireplace, a simple wooden cross her father had carved caught the first rays of sun. It was a reminder of a different kind of man. A man who protected, who cherished, not a man who controlled. At 52, Marion's hands told her story, calloused from splitting wood, scarred from gutting fish. They were hands that knew how to survive. Her face was weathered by mountain winters, but her eyes were clear, watchful. They missed nothing. This cabin was her testament. She'd built it from a rough shelter into a home, chinked the logs herself, hauled the stones for the foundation from the creek bed. Every nail, every board, was earned through her own sweat and labor. This place was hers. No one could take it from her. Her routine was a shield. Check the snares, or tend the garden, mend the roof, prepare for winter, always for winter. The isolation that once felt like a cage had become a comfortable rhythm. She knew every creak of the floorboards, every call of the birds in the eaves. But in the evenings, when the fire burned low, the memories would surface. She'd tried for a decade to forget Thomas Hartwell, the charming man she'd married at 23, the man who was so attentive when others were watching. Behind closed doors, he was a different person. He believed a wife was property, something to be controlled, corrected, and kept in line. The bruises were easy to hide at first, long sleeves, a little powder, but Thomas grew bolder, more careless, more convinced of his right to discipline what he called his possession. The final night still haunted her dreams. He'd been standing over her bed, drunk and furious. His hands found her throat, and in that moment of pure terror, something inside her didn't break. It snapped. It snapped into perfect, cold clarity. She would not die here, not at his hands. When he finally passed out, she gathered what little she could and walked into the darkness. She never looked back. The mountains almost killed her that first winter. She knew nothing of survival, but desperation was a good teacher. And the alternative, going back to Thomas, made every frozen night, every hungry day, bearable. She learned. By spring, she could snare a rabbit. By the second summer, she could tan a hide. By the third year, she was someone Thomas Hartwell would never recognize. Strong, self-sufficient, and completely beyond his reach, or so she thought. On a shelf in her pantry, hidden inside a coffee tin, was the wedding ring she could never bring herself to throw away. It wasn't for love. It was a reminder, a cold piece of gold that reminded her of the price of trusting the wrong man. Her reflection in the window was of a stranger, not the frightened girl who ran, but not the carefree girl she'd been before either. She was something else now, tempered by hardship, wrapped in armor, safe, but alone. Sometimes in the quiet moments just before sleep, she'd wonder, what would it feel like to have a hand gently brush the hair from her face? To hear another person's breathing in the dark? She always pushed the thoughts away. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford, a risk she'd taken once and paid for dearly. The day was unfolding just like all the others. Check the snares, tend the garden, fix the loose board on the porch. The rhythm kept the loneliness at bay. But as she reached for her jacket, she paused. She looked one last time at the trail winding down from the mountain pass. It was empty. It was always empty. She whispered the same prayer she offered every morning, not for rescue, but for the strength to face another day alone. She had no way of knowing that this day was different. No way of knowing that the empty trail was about to bring someone to her door. Someone who would shatter her carefully constructed world. The sound came first, a distant, painful creak. Marion froze, hand on the garden gate. Her senses, honed by a decade of solitude, went on high alert. This wasn't the sound of the wild. This was the sound of something man-made. Something failing. It was a wagon. Her first instinct was to run, bar the door, grab the rifle, wait for it to pass. It was the instinct that had kept her alive. But the sound grew closer, more desperate. A sharp crack echoed through the pines. Something had just broken. Badly. Against her better judgment, she moved toward the trail. Through the trees, she saw him. A man hunched over the reins of a tired mule. His wagon listed heavily, a rear wheel wobbling like a dying animal. As she watched, the wheel gave a final, violent shudder and then collapsed. The wagon lurched to a halt. The man just sat there for a long moment, shoulders slumped in defeat. When he climbed down, he moved with the careful deliberation of someone who lived with old pain, favoring his left leg. He was maybe in his early 40s with graying hair and the scarred hands of a blacksmith. He knelt by the broken wheel, his touch surprisingly gentle as he assessed the splintered wood. His face told the whole story. This wasn't a simple fix. Thunder rumbled overhead. The sky was turning a bruised purple. A mountain storm was coming, and it was coming fast. The stranger looked up, and Marion knew he was thinking the same thing she was. He was trapped. There was no town close enough to reach. That's when she heard her father's voice in her head. A person stranded in the mountains isn't a stranger, Marion girl. They're a neighbor in need. But that was before Thomas. Before she learned that kindness was a weapon that could be used against you. That opening your door could mean losing everything. The first fat drops of rain made the decision for her. "You there," she called out, stepping from the trees. She held her rifle low, but she made sure he saw it. "That wheel's not taking you anywhere tonight?" The man turned. His face held surprise, but not alarm. Not the calculating look she'd learned to fear. His eyes were the color of weathered leather, and when he smiled, it was with genuine relief. "No, ma'am, I don't believe it is," he agreed, touching the brim of his hat. "Name's Jed Boone. I'm a traveling smith, and I appear to be in a bit of a predicament." "Marion Pike," she said, keeping her distance. "And that predicament is about to get a whole lot worse. Storm's coming. I don't suppose there's anywhere nearby a man could—" "There's a lean-to behind my cabin," she heard herself say, the words tumbling out before her caution could stop them. "Dry enough for you and the mule, but I'll need to see what you're carrying first." It was a reasonable demand in these parts. Jed nodded without hesitation. He untied the canvas cover on his wagon. Inside were the tools of his trade, neatly organized. Hammers, tongs, an anvil, bars of iron. "Nothing here but what a smith needs to make his living," Jed said. "Though I understand your caution. A woman alone up here, you'd be a fool not to be careful." He understood. He didn't mock her. He didn't pity her. He just understood that her wariness was earned. The rain was coming down harder now. "Bring your mule around back," she said, gesturing. "There's hay in the lean-to, water in the trough. You can make camp there for the night." "That's mighty generous of you, Miss Pike," he said, and the way he said her name, with simple respect, made a small crack appear in the armor she'd worn for so long. As he led the mule toward the shelter, speaking to it in a low, gentle murmur, she watched from the porch. He made sure the animal was comfortable, dry, and fed before he even thought about his own needs. It spoke of a decent nature, but Thomas had seemed decent too. At first, the rain turned into a downpour. "There's hot coffee if you want some," she called out, surprising herself as much as him. "And cornbread from this morning." He looked up, rain dripping from his hat. "That's kind of you, but I don't want to impose." "A man could catch his death out here," she said, her practical side winning again. "Come up to the porch when you're done. Just wipe your boots." As she went inside to put the coffee on, she wondered what she was doing. offering hospitality to a stranger for the first time in a decade. She had no way of knowing that the broken wheel was just the first crack, not just in the wagon, but in the walls she had so carefully built around her heart. The storm passed, and morning came with a sharp, clean clarity. Marion woke to an unfamiliar sound. Someone moving outside her cabin. For a split second, panic seized her. The old familiar terror. Then she remembered. The blacksmith, Jed Boone. She moved to the window. He was already up, tending to his mule. He'd respected her space completely. The night before, he'd accepted her coffee, but had stayed on the porch, their conversation passing through the screen door. Close enough for courtesy, but distant enough for safety. She heard a gentle knock. "Miss Pike? Hope I didn't wake you. Wanted to get an early look at that wheel." "You didn't wake me," she lied. In truth, she hadn't slept. The presence of another person so close had been a constant, unnerving hum in the back of her mind. "Coffee's almost ready." When she opened the door, he was standing a few feet back, hat in his hands. The morning light showed the details she'd missed in the storm. The silver in his hair, the careful way he held himself to favor his bad leg, and the hammer that hung from his belt. It was old, the handle worn smooth with use. It looked like it was a part of him. "That wheel's in worse shape than I'd hoped," Jed said, accepting the cup she offered. "Hub's cracked clean through. 2 spokes are gone. It's not a repair job. It needs a full rebuild." She looked for frustration in his face, but saw only calm acceptance. This was a man used to solving problems. "How long will that take?" 3 days, maybe 4, he said, gazing at the mountains. "That is, if you don't mind me setting up my forge in your yard." "It's no imposition," she said, the words coming too quickly. "You're welcome to do what needs to be done." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, and she felt a blush creep up her neck. She was so out of practice with simple human conversation, but his smile was gentle. "I'm grateful for your kindness, Miss Pike. I promise to stay out of your way." He didn't stay out of her way. Not really. As the morning wore on, she found herself watching him work. He set up his portable forge with a methodical grace. When he lit the fire and worked the bellows, the rhythmic ring of hammer on anvil echoed off the mountains. It was a lonely sound made beautiful. He worked with a quiet, focused intensity. Each strike of the hammer was precise, purposeful. There was an artistry to it that captivated her. It had been so long since she'd seen anything being created, instead of just maintained. Her life was about survival. His work, even fixing a broken wheel, was about craft. At noon, she found herself offering him lunch. "There's venison stew, more than I can eat." They ate on the porch, a careful distance between them. The conversation came easier now. "You do fine work," she said. "My father's trade," he replied, "said a man who could work iron would never want for a job." He was right about that. "He taught you well. I can see the care you put into it." "Care is the most important part," Jed said, his gaze distant. "Iron remembers how it's treated. Hurry it or force it, and it'll break when you need it most. But take your time, listen to what it's telling you, and it'll serve you faithfully for a lifetime." Something in his words resonated deep inside her, as if he wasn't just talking about iron. As they finished their meal, she realized something unsettling. For the first time in 10 years, she wasn't counting the minutes until she could be alone again. It was a dangerous feeling, but as Jed returned to his forge and the music of his hammer began again, she let herself enjoy it, just for a little while. By the second evening, the awkwardness had settled into a quiet routine. He worked, she did her chores, and the sound of his hammer was a constant, reassuring presence. As the sun set, painting the peaks in fire and gold, they sat on the porch with their coffee. The silence between them was no longer tense. It was comfortable. "This is beautiful country," Jed said, his voice low. "Must be something, living here year-round." "It has its challenges," Marion replied, "but it's honest. The mountains don't lie to you." He glanced at her, his eyes perceptive. "Sounds like you've had your fill of things that weren't honest." It was an invitation, not a demand, and for some reason she accepted it. "I was married once, a long time ago. Turned out I didn't know him as well as I thought. A bad marriage has a way of teaching hard lessons, Jed said quietly. I'm sorry you had to learn them. He didn't pry. He just offered sympathy. It made her feel safe enough to ask a question of her own. What about you? Ever been married? No, ma'am. Came close once before the war. He was quiet for a long moment. She was a good woman. Deserved better than what I came back as. There was a world of pain in those few words. Marion looked at his injured leg. The war changed a lot of men. Changed some more than others, Jed agreed. I was lucky, I suppose. Kept my limbs. But I brought something back with me. Something that didn't belong in a peaceful life. Her name was Sarah. She was smart enough to see it, even when I tried to hide it. His honesty was a stark contrast to Thomas, who had never admitted a single fault. What did you bring back? She asked softly. Jed stared out into the gathering dark for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Dreams, he finally said, his voice heavy, and a way of waking up that's dangerous to anyone close by. I woke up one night with my hands around Sarah's throat. She just tried to shake me from a nightmare. The confession hung in the air between them. Marion should have been terrified. This man was admitting to violence, to instincts he couldn't control. Instead, she felt a strange kinship. They were both damaged, both carrying scars from their pasts. That was 15 years ago, Jed continued. I've been on the road ever since, never staying anywhere long enough to hurt anyone, she finished for him. To disappoint anyone, he corrected gently. There's a difference. There's a big difference, she said with a conviction that surprised her. Disappointment heals. The other thing, it leaves scars that never fade. He turned to look at her, and in the dim light, she saw a flicker of understanding, the silent acknowledgement of two survivors. I should probably tell you, Jed said carefully, I still have those dreams sometimes. If you'd rather I made camp farther away from the cabin. You haven't hurt anyone in 15 years, Marion interrupted. That speaks to who you are now, not who you were then. The gratitude in his eyes was almost painful to see. Besides, she added, a small smile touching her lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. I'm not exactly defenseless, and I'm a very light sleeper. That earned her a genuine smile in return. I don't doubt that, Miss Pike. You strike me as someone who's learned to take very good care of herself. I have, she agreed, but it's nice to know I don't always have to. The words slipped out, raw and vulnerable. But as they sat in the comfortable darkness, listening to the night sounds of the mountains, she didn't regret them. For the first time in a decade, she was starting to remember what it felt like to trust someone. And it didn't terrify her. Not completely. The third morning, it was raining, a soft, steady rhythm on the cabin roof. Marion woke and found herself making breakfast for two. Flapjacks and bacon. More food than she'd cooked at one time in years. She carried a plate out to the lean-to, where Jed was already working, the glow of his forge a warm orange against the gray dawn. Thought you might be hungry, she said. You don't need to do that, he started. I know, she cut him off. I want to. That small distinction seemed to mean the world to him. They ate together under the shelter of the roof, the rain drumming a peaceful rhythm around them. Don't you get lonely? She asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. It was too personal, too revealing. Sometimes, he admitted, but lonely on the road is different. You can always tell yourself the next town might be different. When you're staying put, well, that's when you have to face what you're really running from. His words hit her like a physical blow, her sanctuary, her fortress. Wasn't it just a beautiful prison where she could hide from the chance of ever being hurt again? What are you running from? She asked quietly. He stared into his coffee cup. The possibility that I might hurt someone I care about, he said, and maybe the possibility that I might not, that I might find someone willing to take the risk, and then they'd find out I'm not worth it. The raw honesty of it stole her breath. She knew both those fears, the terror of causing harm and the even greater terror of being found wanting. Before she could think, she was telling him about a photograph of her parents, hidden in a drawer. They were happy, she said. The way people are when they just fit together. I thought that's what love was supposed to look like. When I married Thomas, I kept waiting for that feeling, but it never came. The photograph, Jed prompted gently. You still have it. I can't look at it, but I can't throw it away. It's proof that real love exists, even if it's not for me. The bitterness in her own voice shocked her. Maybe it's not that it's not for you, Jed said carefully. Maybe you just haven't found the right person to be brave with. Brave. Brave enough to be seen, flaws and all, he said, and brave enough to see someone else the same way. His words settled in the space between them. She thought of the small kindnesses they'd shared, the meals, the quiet conversations. Was this what bravery looked like? Not a grand gesture, but the quiet choice to stay when every instinct screamed to run? The wheel's nearly finished, Jed said, changing the subject. Another day, maybe two, and I'll be on my way. The words should have been a relief. Her solitude would be restored. Her quiet, safe life would return. Instead, all she felt was a sharp, sudden pang of disappointment. You'll be glad to get back to your travels, she managed to say. Will I? Jed asked, and his eyes held hers. I'm not so sure I will. These have been some of the most peaceful days I've had in a very long time. The admission hung between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Neither of them was ready to touch it. But as Jed went back to his forge, Marion found herself wondering, what if the wheel took just a little longer to fix? What if her fortress could become a sanctuary for two? The rain continued to fall, and with it, the slow, steady erosion of the walls around her heart. The fourth day was clear and bright, and a new closeness had settled between them. An unspoken understanding. She found reasons to linger near his forge. He found reasons to slow his work on the wheel. When she brought him a cup of water, his fingers brushed against hers. The touch lasted just a second too long. A spark jumped between them. The fragile peace shattered that afternoon. She'd gone inside to fetch some cider. When she came back out, Jed was on the porch, staring intently at something in his hands. What's that? She asked. He looked up, a guilty expression on his face. I'm sorry, it fell out of your apron pocket. I was just putting it back when... He held up a folded piece of paper. Yellowed with age, worn soft at the creases. Her blood ran cold. She knew what it was. She snatched it from his hand with a violence that made him flinch. Don't touch that, she hissed, her voice sharp with a sudden, overwhelming panic. It was too late. The damage was done. Not because he'd read it. She could see he hadn't, but because he'd seen her reaction. The trust they had so carefully built crumbled into dust. Marion, I'm sorry, he said, rising slowly, his hands held up in a gesture of peace. I wasn't prying. It just fell out. It doesn't matter, she snapped, clutching the letter to her chest like a shield. Some things are private. The letter felt like it was burning a hole through her dress. It was from Thomas, one of the last ones he'd sent, full of threats, full of promises of what he would do when he found her. She should have burned it years ago, but she kept it as a reminder to never, ever let her guard down. You don't understand, she said, backing away toward the cabin door. There are things, terrible things. What things? Jed asked, and his voice wasn't curious. It was full of a deep, genuine concern that stopped her in her tracks. What could be so terrible that you can't trust me? The question hung between them. It was a choice, the safety of her secrets or the terrifying possibility of connection. He's still looking for me, she whispered, the words ragged. Thomas, my husband. After all these years, he's still hunting me. Understanding dawned in Jed's eyes. It was followed by a flash of cold, hard fury. How do you know? Her hands shook as she unfolded the letter. Because he writes to me. He sends letters to post offices in nearby towns. People forward them, thinking they're being kind, helping the poor woman who lives alone in the mountains. She held the letter out. Jed took it, his hands gentle. His expression darkened as he read the cramped, angry script. When did this arrive? He asked, his voice dangerously calm. 2 months ago. He says he's getting closer, that he has men asking questions. He says when he finds me... She couldn't finish. He won't, Jed interrupted, his voice like iron. Whatever he thinks he's going to do, it won't happen. You don't know him, she said, shaking her head. He nearly killed me once. He's had 10 years to let that anger fester. And you've had 10 years to get stronger, Jed shot back. You're not the same woman who ran from him. You've learned to survive. That has to count for something. She wanted to believe him, but the fear was a poison that had been in her veins for too long. I thought I was safe here, but if he's getting closer, then we'll deal with it, Jed said simply. Together. The word hit her like a physical blow. We? You think I'm going to finish this wheel and just ride away, knowing he's coming for you? Knowing you're in danger? His eyes burned with an intensity she'd never seen before. You think these past few days, your kindness, meant so little to me? I never asked for your help, she whispered, but the words had no strength. No, you didn't, he said, folding the letter and handing it back. But you've got it anyway. The only question is whether you're going to accept it. Their fingers touched as she took the letter. This time, neither of them pulled away. And in that small moment of contact, something shifted inside her. The fear was still there. But for the first time, it wasn't alone. Hope was there too, a tiny, fragile seed in the rocky soil of her heart. The fifth morning, an unseasonable chill was in the air. Marion woke to the sound of hoofbeats on the trail. It wasn't the slow plod of Jed's mule. This was a horse being ridden hard. She was at the window in an instant, rifle in hand. A lone rider emerged from the trees. He wore the star of a territorial sheriff. He was young, but his face looked old with trouble. Her first instinct was to hide. But Jed was already stepping out of the lean-to. There was no avoiding this. Morning, the sheriff called out, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. Name's Deputy Marshal Cole Bennett. Looking for a woman who might be living up in these parts. Jed moved, casually positioning himself between the lawman and the cabin door. What kind of woman? Missing person, Bennett said, dismounting. Name of Marion Hartwell. Went missing about 10 years back. Husband's been looking for her ever since. Hartwell. The name was a punch to the gut. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering. 10 years is a long time to keep looking, Jed observed, his voice neutral. Recent tips suggested she might be in the Tetons, the deputy said, pulling out a piece of paper. Woman would be in her 50s now, probably goes by her maiden name. Pike. Ice flooded her veins. He knew her name. Thomas had been so thorough. Haven't seen anyone like that, Jed lied smoothly. What's she wanted for? It was the right question. If Thomas had framed her for a crime, this was the moment it would come out. Not wanted exactly, Bennett said, and he sounded uncomfortable. Husband says she's not well, needs medical attention, says she ran off during some kind of breakdown. Might be a danger to herself or others. The lie was brilliant, twisted, perfect. Thomas, the concerned husband. Marion, the unstable wife. Dangerous how? Jed pressed. The deputy consulted his notes. Report says she attacked her husband before she disappeared, left him with some serious injuries. There's concern she might not be thinking clearly. Isolation can do things to a person's mind, Jed said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. So can a lot of other things. The deputy looked at him sharply. You speak from experience? I've seen enough to know there's usually two sides to every story, Jed replied, especially when it comes to missing wives and concerned husbands. The tension crackled between the two men. Bennett's hand drifted closer to his gun. Well, the deputy said, his tone turning official, I'd be obliged if you'd keep an eye out. There's a reward in it. Mr. Hartwell is a man of considerable means, and he's eager to have his wife back home, where she belongs. Where she belongs. The phrase echoed in Marion's mind, Thomas's voice hissing it at her during their worst fights. And remember, Bennett added as he mounted his horse, if this woman is as unstable as her husband says, approaching her could be dangerous. Best to just contact the authorities. He touched the brim of his hat and spurred his horse back down the trail. As the sound of hoofbeats faded, Marion felt paralyzed. Thomas hadn't just found her. He'd weaponized the law against her. He'd painted her as a monster. Now anyone who found her would be a hero for turning her in. Anyone who helped her would be a criminal. Jed appeared in the doorway, his face grim. How much of that did you hear? Enough, she whispered. He's turned me into the villain in our own story. You defended yourself, Jed said fiercely, kneeling beside her chair. Whatever you did to get away from him was self-defense. Try telling that to a judge, she said bitterly. When it's my word against the word of a respectable businessman, a crazy woman who's been hiding in the mountains for a decade, who do you think they'll believe? Jed was quiet for a long moment, seeing the genius of the trap Thomas had laid. She couldn't run. She couldn't hide. She was cornered. The deputy didn't seem entirely convinced, Jed said finally. The way he talked, he had his doubts. It doesn't matter what he believes, Marion cried. He has his orders, and Thomas has his story, his money, his influence. No, Jed said, rising to his feet with a sudden, fierce determination. No, that's not what matters now. What matters is what we're going to do about it. Because running isn't an option anymore, and hiding sure as hell isn't working. Marion looked up at him. She saw not just the gentle blacksmith, but something else, something harder, more dangerous, the soldier he'd once been. What are you suggesting? She asked. I'm suggesting, Jed said, his voice low and cold as iron from a winter stream, that it's time to stop letting Thomas Hartwell write your story. It's time to take the fight to him before he brings it here. The rifle lay across her lap, its familiar weight a cold comfort. She'd cleaned and loaded it with steady hands, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Tell me about him, Jed said. He was organizing his pack, checking his own revolver. Not the marriage. Tell me how he thinks. His weaknesses. Marion's fingers traced the worn stock of the rifle. He's patient, she began. He plans. He never acts in anger, but he's arrogant. He believes he's the smartest man in any room. He never, ever expected me to fight back. The deputy, Jed said. Real law or one of Thomas's men? I don't know, she admitted. With his money, he could have bought a badge or convinced a real lawman his story was true. It doesn't matter. The result is the same. They both knew Thomas was coming. The only questions were when and how. He'll come at night, Marion said with certainty. He always preferred the dark for his worst work. Then we'll be ready for him, Jed replied. But Marion, I need you to be prepared. This may not end peacefully. Was she prepared? The woman who had fled into the mountains 10 years ago would have crumbled, but the mountains had forged her into someone new. Someone who knew that survival sometimes demanded a terrible price. I won't run again, she said, and her voice was as steady as the mountains around them. I'm done running. Jed looked at her, and for the first time, he seemed to see the steel beneath her quiet surface. Good, he said simply, because you're not facing this alone. Why? The question escaped her, raw and vulnerable. Why are you doing this? Risking your life for a woman you've known for 5 days? He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with an emotion she couldn't name. Because in 5 days, you've shown me more acceptance than I've known in 15 years of wandering, he said. Because when you look at me, you don't just see a damaged soldier. You see a man worth talking to, a man worth trusting. He took a ragged breath. Because I'm falling in love with you, Marion, and I'll be damned if I let that bastard take away the first bit of light I've seen since the war. The confession struck her like lightning. In a single heartbeat, everything shifted. They weren't just defending her life anymore. They were defending a future. Jed, she started. You don't have to say anything, he said quickly. I know it's too soon, too complicated. She reached across the table and took his scarred hands in hers. It's not too soon, she said, and it's not too complicated. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone care if I lived or died. Let alone what? He prompted gently. Let alone love me, she whispered, the words scraping her throat. I thought that part of my life was over, that I was too damaged. Maybe we're both too damaged for what normal people call love, he said, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. Or maybe that's why this works. Maybe two broken people can build something stronger than either of them could alone. A sound cut through the air. Hoof beats, not one horse but several, moving with tactical precision, flanking the cabin, cutting off any escape. "He's here," she whispered. Jed was on his feet in an instant, revolver in his hand. "How many?" Marion peered through a crack in the curtains. "4, maybe 5. They're surrounding us." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she picked up her rifle. Just like Thomas, he never believed in a fair fight. "Remember the plan," Jed said, moving to the door. "Stay low, watch your angles, and do not hesitate." A voice called out from the darkness. A voice she had prayed she would never hear again. Rich, cultured, dripping with false reason. "Marion, darling," Thomas Hartwell called. "I know you're in there. It's time to come home." The sound of his voice was a physical blow. For a split second, she was 25 again, helpless and terrified. But then she felt Jed's presence beside her, solid and real. And she remembered the woman she had become. He wasn't hunting the broken girl who had fled. He had found the woman who had survived. "I'm not coming anywhere with you, Thomas," she called back, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "And I'm not your darling." A harsh laugh echoed from the trees. "Oh, Marion, do you really think playing mountain woman for 10 years changes who you are? You're still mine, my responsibility, and I've come to take what belongs to me." The old possessiveness was still there, but now it was edged with 10 years of frustrated rage. "Last chance, darling," he called. "Come out peacefully. Force my hand, and I can't guarantee the safety of your friend." She looked at Jed. His face was a mask of grim determination. They had made their choice. "Go to hell, Thomas," she shouted, and the sound of her chambering around in her rifle was the only answer he needed. The time for running was over. The reckoning had arrived. The silence that followed was heavy, stretched thin with the promise of violence. Shadows moved between the trees, Thomas's men taking their positions. "You always were stubborn," Thomas called out, his voice laced with mock affection. "But we both know how this ends. You can't hide behind that stranger forever." Jed's whisper was low and urgent. "I count 4 besides him. They're good, disciplined. This isn't the first time he's hunted someone." The thought sent a chill through Marion. How many others had there been? "Marion," Thomas's voice came again, closer this time. "One last chance. Walk out that door, or I can't be responsible for what happens to your blacksmith friend." He knew exactly where to twist the knife. Make her feel responsible. Make her surrender to protect an innocent man. "Classic tactic," Jed murmured. "Don't let him in your head. We're stronger together." A face appeared at the window. Thomas, older, his hair gray, but his eyes held the same cold, calculating light. "There she is," he said, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. "My beautiful, wayward wife. Mountain living doesn't suit you, darling, but don't you worry. We'll have you home soon." Rage, pure and hot, burned away the last remnants of her fear. "I'm not your wife anymore, Thomas," she snarled. "I stopped being your wife the night you tried to strangle me." "Now, Marion, you know that's not how it happened," he chided, his voice a smooth river of lies. "You had one of your episodes. You attacked me. I was only trying to calm you down." He was rewriting history, trying to make her doubt her own mind. It was his most powerful weapon, but the mountains had taught her to trust her gut, and her gut was screaming that he was a liar. "The only episode I had was believing you for 10 years, she shot back. "But I'm done with that now." His laugh was cold. "Oh, darling, you really have lost your mind. But that's all right. The doctors at the hospital will help you remember things properly." The hospital, a private sanitarium, a place where inconvenient wives disappeared forever. "Time's up, Marion," Thomas announced. "Boys, you know what to do." The world exploded, windows shattered, the door splintered off its hinges. Men poured into her sanctuary, but the woman they found waiting was not the one they expected. The rifle in her hands spoke with a deafening roar. The first man through the door staggered back, clutching a ruined shoulder. Jed's revolver barked twice. A second attacker dropped without a sound. The cabin was a whirlwind of gun smoke, splintered wood, and the screams of wounded men. Enough! Thomas's voice cut through the chaos. He stepped through the ruined doorway, his hands raised in a gesture of peace that was utterly false. Two more of his men were visible behind him, rifles ready. Very impressive, darling. The wilderness has certainly given you teeth. There was admiration in his voice, and that was more terrifying than his rage. He saw this as a game, a fascinating puzzle. But surely you realize this changes nothing, he said, stepping over one of his wounded men. You can't win. All you've done is complicate your return. The only thing complicated here is your delusion that she's going anywhere with you, Jed said, his revolver steady on Thomas's chest. Thomas finally turned his full attention to Jed. Ah, the protector. Do you have any idea who you're defending? This woman is legally incompetent. I have court documents, medical opinions. You have lies, Marion interrupted. She stepped forward, her father's hunting knife gleaming in her hand. Well-crafted lies, but lies all the same. The sight of the blade made Thomas flinch. For a split second, the mask of civilization fell away, revealing the monster beneath. You cut me, he hissed, the memory of that final night flashing in his eyes. With that very knife. I remember defending myself, Marion said, her voice like ice. I remember a woman who decided she'd rather carve her way out of hell than spend another night in it. And I've spent 10 years tracking you down, he roared, all pretense gone. 10 years of my life, my money, my reputation, all because my property decided to run away. There it was, the truth. This was never about love. It was about ownership. Then consider this your final payment, Marion said, and she lunged. The blade slid between his ribs with the deadly precision of a hunter dressing her kill. He looked down at the spreading stain on his shirt, his eyes wide with a shock that was almost comical. He had never truly believed she would do it. You always, she whispered as he sank to his knees, underestimated me. The gunfire that followed was brief and decisive. When the smoke cleared, only Marion and Jed were left standing in the wreckage of her home. The air was thick with the smell of blood and gunpowder. But for the first time in 10 years, it was also thick with the scent of freedom. 3 weeks later, Marion stood in her doorway, watching Jed work. They had patched the cabin as best they could, but it was different now. The bullet holes in the walls were reminders, scars, not of fear, but of victory. A place of hiding had become a home. The sound of his hammer on the anvil was the new rhythm of her life. Today, he wasn't making horseshoes or mending tools. He was crafting something small, something delicate. When he held it up to the light, she saw what it was, a ring. It wasn't gold or silver. It was forged from simple, honest iron, shaped with a patience and care that was so much a part of him. It's beautiful, she said, stepping onto the porch. He looked up, a shy smile transforming his weathered face. It's not much, he said, but I was hoping. Yes, she said, before he could even ask the question. I haven't even asked you properly, he protested, but his smile grew wider. You don't need to, she replied, holding out her left hand. I know what the right question sounds like. The iron ring slipped onto her finger. It was still warm from the forge. It fit perfectly. It felt nothing like the cold, heavy shackle Thomas had put there a lifetime ago. This was a promise, not a cage. I love you, Jed said, his voice thick. I love your strength, your courage. I love that you survived everything that should have broken you. I love you too, Marion replied, tears blurring her vision. I love the way you see beauty in broken things. I love that you stayed. They stood together in the afternoon sun, two damaged people who had found a way to be whole again. The mountains stood silent witness. So, Jed asked, his arms wrapping around her waist. What now? Now, Marion said, leaning back against him. We live. They would fix the cabin, tend the garden, prepare for the winter. They would face whatever came next together. The bodies of Thomas and his men were buried deep in the woods, under stones that would soon be mistaken for the mountain itself. The deputy marshal never came back. Marion suspected he never would. Some stories, it turned out, were better left untold. I haven't been touched gently in 10 years, she whispered, the words she'd been too afraid to say before. Jed didn't answer with words. He answered by turning her to face him, his calloused hands cupping her face with a tenderness that made her heart ache. His fingers traced the lines the years had carved there, not as flaws, but as proof of her survival. His kiss was a promise of all the sunrises to come, all the quiet moments, the simple, breathtaking miracle of not being alone. As the first stars appeared over the Tetons, Marion Pike, soon to be Marion Boone, fell asleep to the sound of another heart beating beside her own. If this story of survival and redemption moved you, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the story we have coming for you tomorrow.